Thousands of responsible gun owners are losing their concealed carry permits, and it has nothing to do with what you'd expect. No criminal charges, no threatening behavior, no violations of carry laws. They're losing permits because of a piece of equipment most people spend less than $30 on and never think about again. And the worst part? Most of them had no idea this was even possible until they received the suspension notice in the mail. The equipment failure happening across the country isn't the firearm itself, it's the holster. That small piece of leather or polymer that holds your weapon has quietly become the #1 cited reason for concealed carry permit suspensions in multiple jurisdictions. Law enforcement agencies are now documenting holster safety during routine traffic stops, investigating equipment after accidental discharges, and reviewing carry setups during permit renewals. What was once treated as a simple accessory has transformed into a legal liability that can cost you your carry rights, sometimes permanently. Here's what makes this trend so insidious. The gun owners facing suspensions aren't reckless. They're not criminals. They're ordinary permit holders who passed background checks, completed training requirements, and carry legally every day. Their only mistake was trusting the wrong holster, and understanding exactly what that mistake looks like and why authorities are cracking down so aggressively could be the difference between maintaining your carry rights and losing them over something completely preventable. The shift in how holsters are being scrutinized represents a fundamental change in concealed carry enforcement that most permit holders haven't caught up with yet. For decades, concealed carry laws focused primarily on who could carry and where they could carry. The equipment itself rarely received serious attention beyond basic requirements that the firearm be concealed. But that enforcement landscape has transformed dramatically over the past few years, driven by a combination of documented safety incidents, updated training standards, and increasing legal liability concerns among permit-issuing authorities. Concealed carry laws don't just regulate firearms anymore, they regulate how those firearms are carried, secured, and maintained throughout the carry day. Many states now have specific statutory language requiring that handguns be carried in a manner that prevents negligent discharge, accidental exposure, or loss of control. Those requirements sound reasonable on paper, but in practice, they give authorities significant discretion to evaluate your carry equipment and deem it inadequate or unsafe based on objective criteria that didn't exist a decade ago. Law enforcement agencies increasingly document whether a firearm was properly secured when responding to any situation involving a permit holder. Traffic stops, wellness checks, domestic calls, or accidental discharges all trigger examination of not just the carrier's behavior, but their equipment. Officers are now trained to look specifically at holster design, retention capability, and trigger coverage. If a holster fails to meet basic safety standards, that observation goes directly into the incident report, and once it's documented, permit authorities have grounds for administrative review. This pattern has pushed holster-related violations near the top of permit suspension reasons in several jurisdictions, sometimes exceeding violations for carrying in prohibited locations or failing to notify law enforcement during encounters. What's remarkable about this trend is how quietly it's happened. There haven't been legislative battles or public debates about holster requirements. The change has occurred primarily through administrative enforcement, updated training protocols, and case-by-case permit reviews that establish precedent without fanfare. The specific holster issue driving most suspensions isn't exotic or highly technical. It's something deceptively simple: inadequate trigger coverage. Holsters that leave any portion of the trigger exposed, that collapse inward when the gun is drawn, or that allow foreign objects to enter the trigger guard area are repeatedly implicated in negligent discharge incidents. And when investigators examine these incidents, the holster itself becomes evidence of unsafe carry practices that justify permit suspension. Here's how these incidents typically unfold in the real world. A permit holder is going about their normal day, carrying concealed as they have for months or years without incident. Something unexpected happens. They need to adjust the holster position, they're getting in or out of a vehicle, they're bending to pick something up, or they're simply moving through their environment. During that movement, some object makes contact with the trigger area. It might be a drawstring from a jacket, it might be loose fabric from a shirt that got caught during movement, it might be the edge of a seatbelt threading into the trigger guard as they buckle up, it might be their own finger catching during reholstering because the holster collapsed and lost its shape. Whatever the specific mechanism, the result is the same: an unintentional trigger pull. The firearm discharges. Sometimes it's into the ground, sometimes into a vehicle, sometimes tragically into the carrier themselves. When that happens in any public setting, Investigators don't just look at the circumstances of the discharge, they examine the equipment in detail, they photograph the holster, they test whether foreign objects can access the trigger, they evaluate retention and structural integrity. And if the holster is deemed unsafe by objective standards, permit suspension often follows automatically, even if no one was injured, and even if this was the carrier's first incident. In many states, carrying in a negligent manner is explicit grounds for immediate administrative action against a permit. The permit isn't a right that requires criminal conviction to revoke. It's a privilege granted under specific conditions, and violating those conditions through demonstrated unsafe practices triggers administrative processes that can suspend or revoke carry rights independently of any criminal charges. This is why training instructors now emphasize repeatedly that choosing a cheap and comfortable holster can turn expensive very quickly when measured in legal consequences. But negligent discharges represent only the most dramatic way holster inadequacies come to official attention. Many permit holders face scrutiny because their holster failed in ways that didn't involve firing the weapon at all. A firearm that shifts position constantly, that tilts and prints excessively, that becomes partially exposed during normal movement, or that actually falls out because retention failed can all attract unwanted attention and law enforcement contact. During those encounters, even if the carrier hasn't violated any carry laws, officers may inspect the holster setup as part of their interaction. They're evaluating whether the equipment represents a safety concern, whether it provides adequate retention, whether it protects the trigger properly. If deficiencies are noted, that information gets documented, and repeated contacts or documented concerns can trigger a review of a permit holder's overall suitability to carry, even in states with strong carry rights and shall issue permit systems. The legal irony here is profound. Many of these permit holders are otherwise extraordinarily careful, law-abiding people. They took training seriously, they practice regularly at ranges, they understand firearm safety rules, they follow carry laws meticulously. Their single mistake lies in underestimating how much legal weight a holster carries in the current enforcement environment. They thought of it as an accessory when authorities now treat it as essential safety equipment subject to the same scrutiny as the firearm itself. So what does a legally solid, defensible holster actually look like when measured against current enforcement standards? The answer involves several non-negotiable characteristics that separate compliant equipment from liability waiting to happen. First and fundamentally, the holster must completely cover the trigger guard with rigid material that does not flex inward under pressure or compress when objects make contact. This isn't about partial coverage or mostly covered. The entire trigger and guard must be inaccessible to anything except a deliberate draw stroke. Second, the holster must provide consistent, reliable retention. The firearm should stay securely in position during all normal movement, including running, bending, sitting, standing, and getting in and out of vehicles. But that retention can't be so extreme that drawing becomes difficult or requires two hands. The balance point is deliberate retention. The gun stays put until you deliberately draw it, but releases cleanly when you need it. Third, and this is where many holsters fail catastrophically, the holster must maintain its shape and structure when the gun is removed. Holsters that collapse when you draw the firearm create enormous danger during reholstering because the trigger becomes exposed or accessible. Reholstering into a collapsed holster is one of the most common causes of negligent discharge because people are looking down, focused on getting the gun back into position, and don't realize the trigger is contacting something as they push the firearm home. Quality materials matter enormously in meeting these requirements. Molded Kydex provides rigid structure that maintains shape consistently. Reinforced leather from quality manufacturers offers durability and trigger protection when properly designed. Hybrid designs with rigid shells covering critical areas combine comfort with safety. What doesn't work are generic fabric holsters, universal fit designs that claim to work with multiple firearm models, or budget options that sacrifice trigger coverage for comfort or ease of use. Proper belt support also plays a crucial role that often gets overlooked. A holster is only as stable as its attachment point. A sagging holster that tilts because it's attached to an inadequate belt can expose critical areas of the firearm or cause retention failure. Quality gun belts designed specifically to support holster weight, distribute load evenly, and maintain consistent positioning throughout the day. Standard dress belts or casual belts simply don't provide the rigidity needed for safe concealed carry. Current training standards and permit authorities increasingly recommend holsters designed specifically for your exact firearm model rather than generic one-size-fits-most options. Custom-molded holsters form perfectly around the specific contours of your weapon, providing maximum retention and trigger protection because they're engineered for that precise shape. Universal holsters make compromises in fit that can create gaps or inadequate coverage for certain firearm models. Why is this enforcement trend catching so many permit holders completely off guard? The answer lies in how the concealed carry community has traditionally approached holsters. For years, they were treated primarily as accessories rather than essential safety equipment. Gun owners spent hours debating caliber choices, comparing sight options, researching ammunition performance characteristics, and discussing grip textures. Holsters received comparatively little attention beyond basic comfort and concealability considerations. Walk into most gun stores and you'll see this priority reflected in how products are displayed and discussed. Firearms occupy prominent positions with detailed specifications and expert staff recommendations. Holsters are often relegated to wall racks with minimal guidance beyond basic sizing. The message, intentional or not, has been that holsters are simple add-ons that don't require the same careful consideration as the firearm itself. But enforcement patterns and training standards are catching up to the reality that holsters represent critical safety equipment deserving equal attention to the weapon they carry. Permit issuing agencies want clear, objective criteria when evaluating carry incidents and determining whether permit holders are carrying responsibly. Holster safety provides exactly that kind of measurable standard. Either the trigger is covered or it isn't. Either the holster maintains structure or it collapses. Either retention is adequate or the firearm can fall out. These are objective assessments that remove subjective interpretation from enforcement decisions. This shift has genuinely surprised many longtime permit holders who carried for years or even decades without anyone questioning their equipment choices. The holster that served them fine for 10 years is suddenly grounds for permit suspension because enforcement standards evolved. It's also fueling a wave of permit suspensions that feel sudden and completely unfair to those affected, who often argue they were following the same practices they always had without any problems until the one incident that brought official scrutiny. Understanding this trend represents the first step towards staying on the right side of both safety and the law in an evolving enforcement environment. The second step involves taking concrete action to evaluate your current carry setup against current standards rather than past practices. When was the last time you critically examined your holster for wear, structural integrity, and adequate trigger coverage? When did you last test retention to ensure the firearm stays secure during vigorous movement? Have you verified that your holster maintains its shape when the gun is drawn, or does it collapse in ways that make reholstering dangerous? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're practical assessments that can prevent permit suspension and potentially prevent tragedy. A holster that was adequate when new may have degraded through daily wear. Leather can soften and lose shape. Kydex can crack or deform. Retention screws can loosen. Regular inspection and maintenance of your holster deserves the same priority as maintaining the firearm itself. If your current holster shows any signs of inadequacy based on the criteria discussed, replacement isn't an optional upgrade. It's a necessary investment in maintaining your carry rights and ensuring safety. The cost difference between a $15 generic holster and a $70 quality design pales in comparison to the legal costs of fighting a permit suspension, the potential liability if something goes wrong, or the permanent consequences of a negligent discharge. Holsters don't receive much glory in gun culture. They're not exciting to discuss compared to new firearm models or ammunition technology, but they quietly determine whether your entire carry setup is responsible or represents a ticking time bomb of legal liability. As permit authorities place increasing emphasis on equipment safety alongside carrier behavior, staying ahead of enforcement trends isn't about paranoia. It's about recognizing reality and adapting accordingly. Checking trigger coverage, testing retention, and evaluating overall holster condition should become simple habits with serious legal payoff. If you've ever upgraded firearm accessories for better performance or reliability, upgrading your holster deserves equal or greater priority. The consequences of holster failure extend far beyond the equipment itself to encompass your legal right to carry, your personal safety, and potentially the safety of everyone around you. The concealed carry community has always emphasized the tremendous responsibility that comes with carrying a firearm in public. That responsibility extends to every component of your carry system, not just the weapon itself. A firearm is only as safe as the equipment securing it and the person carrying it. Neglecting either element creates risks that current enforcement standards are designed to address through permit reviews and equipment scrutiny. This isn't about government overreach or unnecessary regulation. It's about acknowledging that inadequate holsters have caused measurable safety problems that authorities are responding to through updated enforcement. Whether you agree with every aspect of how that enforcement is applied, understanding the trend and adapting to it protects your interests far more effectively than ignoring it until you become a statistic. That's it for today, folks. See you in the next video.